This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So on the last session, we were trying to understand what exactly is branching, and in the branch, how is the changes are going to be stored. And when you work, what you're going to do is you're going to actually use a particular branch and modify the changes. And whatever the pull or the push that you do, kind of doesn't happen only from your repository. So it happens from your repository and a specific branch to a specific branch in the central repository. So that's where the common workflow is. If everyone wants to work on a branch, then create that branch in the central repository. However, if only you want to work on a new branch, then Git gives you the flexibility to create the branch. Okay. Now this is what we learned. Now, to move further, it's all about, guys, can you please mute Raghu? And just request everyone to just check your mobiles or laptop and mute yourself. Okay. So now, whatever you are going to do, it's all about finding out what is your central repository, do a clone, check out to that particular branch and start doing the changes. And you're going to push from your branch to the same branch available in the central repository. The same way, if you want to pull, you're going to pull from the same branch from the central repository to the same branch of your local repository. Okay. Now, this will be your regular workflow. But in addition to it, now what happens, we also have a couple of other workflows that we need to know in Git. Okay, so that way, today we'll try to understand what are those workflows, and in that, what are the different user level functionalities that we will be working on. Okay, so that's what typically we are going to learn fully today. So that will be on the advanced side. So to understand, now let me take this example here. So for a minute, forget about which branch you are working, because if I say that you are working in a Git repository, then definitely it means that you will be working in a particular branch in a repository. Okay, so that way you should have first checked out to a branch and then start doing your work. So let's assume you have a problem, and for fixing that problem, you have to modify some files. Now, regardless of what files it is, what happens is you start writing some changes on couple of the files, and after you write the changes, and then what you do is a unit test. Once again, whether you are a developer or you are writing some automation script, you have to do this first level test, which is called as unit test, so that you can check whether the script is working or the program, which files you have modified, is it working. Okay, so that way, now let's say you wrote some code and you're trying to do some unit test, and what you feel is you are not getting the exact result what you were expecting, or you might feel that you might have to do a change in a better way so that you will get exact result. So now what happens is, whatever you have written is good. I'm not saying it is bad, it is good, but you are expecting to try out everything once again in a different idea or a different method, so that if that works out, you can take it up. But now if you understand what is that literally I want to do, from all the files, whatever I have modified. Now let's say I have modified these two files, 10 lines I have modified. Now, if I want to try out a new idea, then first in this file, I have to undo whatever I have done, so that whatever I had earlier before doing the change, if I go back to that level, then from there I should be able to modify. So this is where, how do you undo it? So that is one problem, because it might be one file or multiple file. Now, along with undo, like I said, you also have to take a backup of it, because let's assume you went ahead and did the undo, and all the changes what you did is gone. So you started modifying it again with a new idea. But after you're testing the second idea, if you realize that the first idea was the best idea, then how will you get back the change? So that is where you cannot just go ahead and undo the change. Okay. Now I'm talking about all those things before the commit. Okay, because if I do a commit, then all the changes will be permanently available. But even before that, you have to do some test and verify, and only then you're going to commit. So that is where when you're literally developing some code or some script, you might have to do different types of changes on top of it again and again, and you want to see which one is good. So that is where every time if you want to undo, then how are you going to undo? And at the same time, it is not just simply undo, but you have to take a backup of it. So that is where, how will you take the backup also? Because I should not be literally saying that, okay, copy this file to some other file name, copy this file to some other file name. Like this, if I have to take backup of 3-4 ideas, then there will be too many files available. So that's where Git gives us an option for that, which is what we call it as stash. Okay, so Git gives us an option called stash. So what do you mean by stash? Remember this clearly. At any point of time, you have modified only in the working directory. Okay, you have not yet staged or you have not yet committed. So you're still working on the changes. So when you have a change which you have modified in the working directory, and when you want to take a backup as well as undo the changes whatever you have done both together, then you can apply a command called stash. So that way, what will stash do? Stash will undo the changes and take a backup of the changes what you have done, and then actually it will go ahead and do a undo. So it will take a backup and undo. So where will the backup be stored? So the backup will be stored inside your repository in an object location. So let's not worry about it for now. So that now if I have to do such a kind of work where I have different ideas and I want to try out everything, then you need to take a backup and then undo. Okay, so if you want to do that, then Git allows you using a command or an option called stash. And again, remember, this is before you are adding to the staging area or you are checking in or committing. That means if the file is in the modified state, those files you can take a backup as well as you can undo the files. Okay, so see how this would be done. Now let me first go to a workspace. Now we had these workspace, right? So let's go to workspace 0. Now just to make sure that everything up to date, we'll do a pull. Okay, it says everything is up to date. Now here, so let's say we have these many files, and just quickly let's look at the git log. Now these are the 2 logs available. Again, I still have many, but I'm just trying to list only the latest 2 commit IDs. So what I will do now, let's go ahead and modify these 2 files. So let's see the content first. See, in both 2.java and 4.java, there is a line called first line. Now I will try to just add one line, which will call it as idea 1. Okay. Let's remove this. Okay, so now because of that, if you see the file, so I have added a line, and because of that, if you say git status, it's going to clearly say that it is modified. Okay, so now, like I said, I try to do some test. Then let's say that I didn't feel the results are good, so let me try it again in a different way. So that is where now I want to do two things together. I want to first take a backup of the changes and then go ahead and do undo. So if you have both the requirement, then what you're going to do is you're going to simply say git stash. Okay. So now inside the workspace, watch this. If I say git stash, first, what did I tell you? It takes a backup and it undoes the changes. So if you say git status now, you will see that the file is not available. In the sense the changes are not available, and you can look at the files also. So what it has done, it typically has undid, right? Or we did the undo. So we took the file which had these two lines, and top of that we added a line called idea1. So when I did the undo, it took me back to my original location. But along with this, what will stash do? So stash will undo, and then it will also take a backup. So that's where if you say list, I'm sorry, what's that? I forgot. Yeah, no hyphen. So if you just say status, sorry, the stash and list, so it will try to show you that there is a backup available. Okay, so it is saying from this commit ID you modify two files, and it is trying to track that and keep a backup. So this way, now in this workspace, every time if you try to do a stash, it will take a backup and all of them will be visible. Okay, now let me do a change once again. So we'll take the same two files and I'll put a new change called idea2. So because of that, now you can see that the files are in the modified state. Okay, and if you look at the file, so I've done some new change. Now once again, if I do a git stash, it will try to take a backup and it will also undo it. Both together will happen. Okay, so first you can see that if I say git status, the content has been removed, which is what it has done the undo. But at the same time, if you go ahead and say git stash list, you would be seeing two references. Okay, so this is how whenever you want to take a backup as well as undo, then you can go ahead and use the stash. Now
Adam,
what is that? Yes,
but for example, if we have multiple stashes, but how would we knowing that like this stash is related to these changes? How would we know that
you
in
can use
future,
the
for
show
example?
command and see which one. That is what I'm coming to. Okay, so now the next question that comes is, what is the need of
Adam,
doing a stash? Yeah,
Adam, my question is working directory always file will be the modify stage, right?
file will not be in a modified state. If you do a clone, then this is where the basics of the first class I told you. Whatever is
Okay.
available
Because,
on the repository will be the same as your working directory. Then the
okay,
file will be in a unmodified state, or
un,
Git will tell that
unmod,
workspace clean.
yeah, unmodified stage, okay. But if
Yeah.
it is in a modified stage, right, and they are not moving in a staging area, right? So it is simply that, na, take slash only working in a working directory, na?
See, when will you put a file to the staging area? Only if you have modified. Okay.
Right.
So that way, why do you want to take a stash? If you have modified something and then you want to take a backup. If you have not modified anything, you don't have to take a backup because it's already available in the repository. Any point
Okay,
of time, you can click
I
out to a
understand.
branch and see.
Sorry, I just glitched that. I understand, because you are editing any file, then it will move in a unchained to modify, right? And in modify, it will come under the staging, right now. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we are not still going to staging area. I'm telling you because there are different commands for that. As of now, we are focusing only on the working directory only. So this way, if you want to take a backup and undo together, then we will go ahead and do a stash. But what is the whole point of taking a backup and undo? Because if you want to do only undo, then you don't need a backup. But you're taking a backup because you don't know whether the change is a good change, and if you need to get it back, then at that time having a backup will be useful. So this is how do you know what is the backup that you have done and what are the changes that is available? So that is where it's quite important for us to understand the stash list. Okay, now typically when you keep doing a stash, the Git stores the content in an array. Okay, now for those who don't know array, so array is nothing but a sequence of values that you're going to keep. So let's assume in a memory you are going to allocate something. Okay, so memory will be block by block. So whatever you try to store, right, there will be one block first, and I'm just trying to tell, there will be one block and then there will be another block. So it's going to keep on adding block by block. Now in an array, the values, that is multiple values, will be stored block by block. However, for every block that you want to identify, we will be using something called as an index number, just like how your pages in a book has an index number, right? The same way, in any array, the first element or the first value that you want to take will have an index of 0. And then from there, the index number will keep increasing like this. Okay. So now, what happens is when you try to do a stash, it will try to first add the value here. So this way, in our case, when I did the stash for the first time, the idea 11 was typically stored here. Okay, and there was nothing. But when you try to store another stash, it will not add to the right side, but it will first push the existing to the next block, and it will create a value here. Okay, so this way, now if you see, our first value became the second value, and whatever the recent stash that you did will be the latest value. Suppose if I do one more stash and a backup, then that will again come here and this will move. So this is how you need to understand how many backup you have done, and in that which value that you want to take. So if now I want to take this value, then I have to say whatever the variable or where you are storing and the index of that. So if I say give me the index value of 2, then it will give me this. If I say give me the index 1's value, then it will give this. And if I say give me the index value of 0, whatever is available, it will give. Okay, so this way, in our example, we did 2 backups or 2 stash. So that is where the index 0 will be now pointed to the second idea, and the first index will be pointing to the first idea. Okay, so this way now, depending on your need, if you want to choose, then that is what you are seeing here, wherein this is nothing but the variable where it is trying to store, and within the flower bracket, whatever you see is the index number. So typically now the 0th index is nothing but your second idea, and the first index is nothing but your idea 1. So that is how, depending on your need, you can get it. So how are you going to get? That is the next question. So now you need to first choose a particular stash index, and then go ahead and say stash @ and within the flower bracket you are going to give the index number. So then what will it do? Git will take the content of the backup of whatever you are choosing, and then it will apply to your current workspace. Okay, watch this now. So nothing is there, right? And just quickly go back to 2.java and 4.java. It is empty in the sense if we don't have the changes. So at this time, if I say git stash apply, and if I say stash @ so let's say I want to take the first idea, then I will say index1. So what it will do, it will try to take the content from the backup and it will be applying here. Okay, so now you can see, so it has taken up. So this is where if you say git status, you have this, and now if you look at the file, you will get back the content. So this is how, when you say stash, it does two things. It takes a backup and it undoes. So that way you keep taking backup and store it, and whenever you feel a particular change is good, then go ahead and say stash apply. But remember this, when you are doing a stash apply, you cannot apply on a modified file, because when it took a stash or a backup, it would have taken from the reference of your file, right? By undoing it, it is going back to the previous location. So whenever you are saying apply, the files in your working directory should be in unmodified state. Okay, because if it is already modified, Git will not know with what reference it has to apply. So remember, whenever you want to apply a stash, your working directory should be unmodified, so that it will bring it everything back to the same content that you had, like how you did before the stash. Okay, so remember that is important. So
Sorry, Adam. Can you show that as in practical, because I couldn't get it clearly.
see, when I did a stash apply, did we had any change? It said workspace is clean. That means there was no change. That is where when we did the apply, it worked. But right now, what is the status in my workspace? There are two files modified. So if I try to apply any other stash, right, it will not allow, because it will say that it's not able to get the reference. So you can see it will not do, because there is already some change. See, you want to apply the backup. What do you mean by stash apply? Take the backup and apply. So that way, when you are applying, if you have already modified something, then there are chances that you would miss it or you would overwrite it. So that is where Git doesn't know what to do. So it will clearly tell only if you have your workspace unmodified, then I can apply a stash. If not, it will not allow you.
Hello, Adam. I have one question. So what happens to the array once we apply the backup? So will it be removed from that stack?
I'll come to it. Okay. So clear with what I said?
Got it.
So
Got it.
you cannot apply if the files have been modified, only if it is unmodified. Because how did you create a backup? When there was some empty content or when there was unmodified, on top of that you modified and took a backup. So that is where it's possible to apply the stash only if you don't have any changes. And once you have all the changes done, what you're going to do is, now let's assume that, why did I take a backup? I took a backup because I wanted to try one more method, and now if I realize that my first method itself is good, I have gone ahead and applied. And here what you're going to do is simply go back to your regular workflow. That is, I have modified now, then I will say git add. So this will take my changes from my working directory to staging area, and then you're going to do a commit. So that way, if I say git
Adam,
commit,
here, like, which start can we apply? How would we know that?
that is what I've been telling you. So you need to keep a track of what are the stashes that you did, because you're not going to keep on doing stash. This is just for a temporary purpose where you are doing some 1 or 2 changes you can use. And again, you can use the git show, like how you saw the commit ID. You can say the stash, and you will be able to see the changes what you have done in that. So this is typically, you need to know why you are doing a backup, because you will just do hardly once or twice, not every time, right? Because regular workflow is, I'm doing some changes, suddenly I might think of doing another way of modifying, then quickly I will be able to do a stash. So that is where, if you have 1 or 2 stashes, you need to know the index number, so that the recent stash will have the index number of 0 and the earlier one will have the index 1. Okay. So this way, if you apply the stash, now the changes has been permanently stored into the repository. However, if you see, by default, when you say stash apply, it will just take the copy from the stash and it will apply. So that way, your stash content or the backup will be still available. Okay. So that is where, do not remove it until you're not going to commit the changes. But once I have done the commit, then I don't need this again, right? Because this is what I have stored it into the repository, and in the repository it is permanently available. Then you can simply go ahead and say git stash clear, and it will try to delete all the backups that you have done. Okay. So that way, remember, stash has 2 purposes. One is taking a backup and undoing. And when you will do it, whenever you have a scenario where you want to modify the files, and before adding to staging area or repository, you want to try out a different way of doing, and then if you need to take a backup and undo together, you can go ahead and say stash. And in that, you can use the stash apply and use the index number and apply the specific stash as per your need. And once you have done, you can just go ahead and say git stash clear, because the changes would have got permanently stored. Okay, so that is the purpose. So stash means backup and undo, both of them. Okay, so this is one scenario.
One question, Adam. So after applying the stash, uh, then again, if I stash the changes what I have got from the backup, so what will happen at that time?
We'll take another backup of that. That's it. Because
So will it,
anytime you have a modified file, if you say stash, then it'll again think of it and take a backup. Because when you say apply, you are not deleting anything. So that's where it's still there, the previous. So if you again do a stash with whatever content you have, it'll again do a backup for that.
okay, so it will again create an entry in that array.
Yes, every time you do, it will take, because Git is not that smart enough to understand that you have different kind of changes. All of them are same. Every time you say stash, it will see, is there a modified file? All those modified file will take it up.
Okay, thanks.
And just for to rephrase it, Adam, this stash can be applied only in the working directory. Once the file is moved to the staging area, that is, if we do git add, then we can't do the stash thing, right?
No, I'll come back to it. That is what I'm trying to tell. There are different scenarios.
No.
So the first scenario we are seeing is,
okay.
yeah, we will come to it. So the first scenario that I mentioned is when you are working in the working directory, you are not even going to staging area or repository. So that way, in the working directory, if you want to take a backup and undo, then you will use stash. Okay, so this is the first scenario. Now, however, let us talk about the next scenario wherein, okay, so this is where what we have is called as reset. Now, the same example, I modified something, but I'm not interested in backup. Okay, so let's assume I modified some changes and I pushed into the staging area. So it would have created a snapshot. Okay, and if I want to undo anything at this level, then there is a different way of undoing. Okay, but before we get into this concept, now I want to talk about another concept here. So if you actually look when you are working in a branch, you will always see that there is something called as head reference. So you can see it says something called head. So what is this head reference? So if you take a branch at any point of time, you will be referring to some commit ID. So how do we know which commit ID we are working? So there will be something called as a indicator or a level. Okay, so that tells us where exactly we are working. So that is what we call it as head reference. So every time in any repository, any branch that you are working, okay, so there will be something called as head reference. Okay, probably I'll put it the other side. Okay, so now there will be something called as head reference, and because of this head reference, we will be able to work in a branch, because whenever you go to a branch, the head reference will be pointing to a commit ID, and because of this, where the head reference is pointing, you will be able to see the content accordingly. So that way, by default, whenever you go to a branch, the head reference will always point to a latest commit ID. So that is where now if you modify something and if you try to check in, it will create a new commit and the head reference will automatically move. And because the head reference is pointing to a commit ID, you will be seeing the corresponding content. Now, if you look at in my workspace, why is that I am not seeing the content of 2.java and 4.java, only first line? That is because earlier our head reference was here. At that point of time, the file had only one line. But after that, we modified by adding a idea one and we committed. Because of that, the head reference moved. So now, since the head reference is pointing here, we are able to see. But if the head reference moves here, we will not be able to see the content. We will see only the first line. Okay, so that is where head is the reference which helps us to exactly point out to a commit and see all the changes based on that. Okay, now why am I talking about this is, see, if my commit ID is some previous commit ID and my head reference is pointing to that, then my working directory will show me that content only. So that way it's the reverse meaning. You are seeing the files and the content because the reference is pointing by the head to some commit ID. That way, now understand, you are seeing because the head reference is pointing here. But let's assume you modified this file and you put into the staging area. Okay, now what happens? As per the logic, whatever the commit ID you are seeing, that changes only you should see. But now what is happening? You are not looking at the commit ID's content. On top of that, you have modified something. So that is where what Git will do is, when you try to put something into the snapshot or the staging area, it will try to create internally some temporary reference. So it is not a commit ID, but a temporary reference. And why it does? Because now you are not pointing to the head because there is a change on top of your commit, but you have not done the commit and it is still available in the staging area. Then what Git will do is it will try to take the head reference and it will be keeping it here, so that it will know this temporary reference is because on top of this commit ID you have done some changes. So that is where it will be able to track. And when you do a commit, then it will remove this temporary reference and create a permanent ID, and then the head reference will be complete on that. But now why am I talking about this is, so if you actually look, when you have modified the files in a working directory and you have put into the staging area, inside your repository also there are some references created. So this is where now, before you are going to commit, if you want to undo, what is it? If you are interested only to undo, no backup concept. Okay, so only undo. But undo means it is not just from the file, because if you have modified the file, then it is only in this working directory. But if you have put into the staging area, then what will happen? You need to undo here also. The same way, as soon as you put into the staging area, there is a temporary reference created. We will not be able to see, but there is a reference created. That is how Git will be able to say that, okay, you have modified some file. So now, if you want to undo in the Git workspace, there are 3 areas, and accordingly you have to undo. Okay, so remember, undoing in Git is not in just files, but based on the 3 areas you have to undo. Because sometimes you might have done a snapshot. Now you want to undo only from the snapshot or the staging area. Then again, it's the same concept. So that is where, depending on where you want to undo, you will be using a option called reset. Okay, so that's where the next option as a workflow, what you will be seeing is git reset. So what do you mean by reset? Reset means undo. When you are going to undo? Before the commit. So before the commit, you could have modified in either working directory or staging area or the head reference in the repo. So now if you want to undo, for each area there is an option. So that is where in git reset there are 3 options. Okay, so one is soft mode, okay, and the other one is mixed mode, and the third one is hard mode. Okay, so what are these going to do? So now when you say soft mode, what it will do is it will try to undo only from the repository reference, that is the head reference, whatever it is pointing to, some temporary reference I told you, right? So that it will be doing a undo. So this is one of the advanced where you just want to go back to a previous reference of the commit ID. Then you can go ahead and do a soft mode. So soft mode is only for repository reference. Okay.
Staging area, right, Adam?
What?
In staging area, right? References in the sense.
Repository reference here. I'm talking about this one. So if you now look, I have modified here, I have modified here, and internally this also get modified. So when I say repository reference, I'm talking about this. Okay. So if you want to undo only this change, then you are going to use the soft mode. But if you say mixed mode, then it will try to undo from the repo plus the staging area. Okay, so it will undo from both. So if I say reset and mixed mode, it will remove the reference from the repo for the temporary case, and whatever that you have put in the staging area, this snapshot also will be undoing, but the content of the file will be still available. Okay, that is working directory. So now if you want to undo from all the 3 areas, then you are going to say hard mode. So in the hard mode, it will try to take from staging area and working directory. So all together in one shot, it will be undoing. So this is what you will be using most of the time. So you have done some changes without knowing that if it is going into the snapshot or the staging area and the head reference temporarily it is created, all of them can be just undid at one shot. So that is where in Git, undoing a change based on 3 areas we will be having 3 modes of undoing or resetting. Again, it might be interview question. Sometime we'll ask what are the 3 modes of undoing or resetting. So you need to know, depending on 3 areas in your workspace, you're going to get 3 modes. Okay. So mixed
Adam,
mode, soft
so
mode.
sorry to interrupt you. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this means that this soft, mixed, and hard is only applicable if the file is staged to the staging area, not yet committed to the repository.
Yes, because when you commit it, then it becomes permanent. Because when it
Permanent, yeah.
becomes permanent, everything will be removed, right? This will also become unmodified. This will also be removed. This will also get permanent. That is what the first point I said. Before you want to do a commit, if you have a requirement of undoing, then depending on the 3 areas, you are going to undo accordingly. Okay. So
Adam,
let's try to take a example,
Adam,
and we will try. Yes.
yeah, I understood working directory and staging, but another stage I didn't understood. Can you please explain the repo stage actually?
Okay. So where is my commit ID currently pointing to? This commit
Yeah,
ID.
head reference.
Because of this, my file, if you look at this, it is showing both the content, correct? Before doing this commit, where was the commit ID? Reference was here. So actually, if you would have seen it, the head reference will be pointing to this. And that is where, before we did the stash apply, when you looked at the file, it has only this content, correct? So what we did, we took this commit ID, we added one line, and then we committed. Because of that, the head reference became here. So that is where now I am able to see the file with these 2 content because the head reference is pointing here. If the head reference points to this, what will happen? I will not see this line. I will see only this line. Is that clear first?
Yes, Adam.
So now I'm putting the reverse of that. See, if you are pointing to this head reference, then definitely you should see only 2 lines. But now what happens? Let's assume I'm going ahead and adding one more content. So what is happening now? The file content is this. So now just in the other way, if you think, is it that you are pointing to this head reference? Definitely not. Why? Because if Git is still pointing the head reference to this commit ID, then you are supposed to see only these 2 lines. But why are you seeing a new line? Because you have modified something, but you have not stored permanently. So that is where, to adjust this internally, you will not be actually able to see, but Git will have created one temporary reference and the head would be pointing to that. So that is where you are still seeing the content. If not, whatever the head reference points, you will be able to see only that. Okay. So in that case, if you want to undo the changes in the repository, that is, if you want to just come back, then you are going to use the soft mode. Getting it?
Yeah, Adam, can't we see the temporary references?
No, you cannot see. That is what I said. It's more of a Git feature, but just for your understanding, I'm trying to tell you as a reference. So just imagine this way. Now, where is the head reference? Head reference is not in this commit ID. That is, the head is not pointing to this commit ID. It is pointing to a reference which is temporarily created. You cannot see. It's more inside the metadata. But now, as I said, based on your need, you can undo this or staging area or working directory. But typically, this repo is only for reference. Okay, you will not be actually using the soft mode. So that's when, if you try to undo, now watch this. Now I modified, okay, and typically my head reference was earlier pointing to F3DA. So just remember this F3DA. And now I modified, it is available only in the working directory. Now, if I go ahead and say add, now it is also available in the staging area and accordingly, like I said, there is one temporary reference also created. Okay, so now let's try to undo and see. So if I say first git reset soft mode, you won't see any change because internally the temporary reference will be altered. But if you check the file has the content, and the same way, if you say git status, it still says the file is available in the staging area also. So that way, when you say soft mode, it has not modified from the staging area as well as the working directory. So both it has not modified. Okay. So now watch the same. If I say mixed mode, then what will it do? It will not do anything on the working directory, but the staging area it will undo. So if I run this, you can see it clearly says it is unstaged. And look at the status now. You can see it is saying it is not yet staged. Earlier it was saying it is staged and it is ready for commit. But now, because you did the reset mixed mode, it will undo from the staging area. Okay. However, if you look at the file, it is still available in the working directory. So that is where when you say mixed mode, it is going to typically undo from the staging area. Now, let me add it to staging area again. So this way now, I have all the changes. So I have internally the change in the temporary reference of repo, staging area, as well as the working directory. I have all the three changes. So now, if I say git reset, the hard mode, you can see it says the head reference is moved back to your actual commit, which is F3DA4. Now, because of that, if I look at my file, I should only see those two lines. Okay, and along with it, if you actually do a git status, it would say that the changes has gone. So this is how, depending on your need, before you are going to do a commit, you are actually going to do a the reset, which will typically undo. But you need to know from which area you want to undo. So that is where, if you say the reset soft mode, it will typically bring back the head reference. But if you say mixed mode, it is going to remove the changes and the snapshot references, as well as if you go ahead and say hard mode of reset, then it will also remove from the working directory. Okay.
But Adam, we are not seeing any effect, right, when we are running the -soft.
No, you are not supposed to use the soft. That's what I'm saying. It's more about for understanding. I'm telling it internally. If not, as a regular user, you will be switching only from undoing the staging area or the working directory. So let's say I modified 10 files, and if I say git add dot, then all of them will go. Then you will realize that, hey, you don't need 10 files. So probably you want to just undo certain files. Then you don't want to undo from the from the working directory. Then you can do the undo from staging area and add only the files that you want. But if you say hard mode, then it will also remove the content from the working directory. So there will be no backup for that. So that is where you need to know, are you interested to take a backup or are you interested to do undo? So, but when you say undo in Git, because of three areas, you have three modes of undoing through the reset option.
Yeah, this like repo reference area, once we adding the files to the staging only, then only we will see, right, Adam?
Yeah, it's more about internal of Git. You don't worry about this mode. Okay, so you are going to use only these two modes, either in the staging area or in the working directory. These are the two things you will be worried as a user.
What is the default mode actually?
Default mode is mixed mode.
Okay.
Okay. So when are you going to use the reset? Whenever you want to only undo, and that also before you are going to do the commit, for temporary files, whatever you have kept in the reference, if you want to undo, then depending on the area, whether if you want to undo from the staging area or from the actual files, you will be using the mixed mode or hard mode. Okay. So
One question, Adam. So for hard resetting, it will be removed everything. So and we can't get back those things. But for remaining two, what happens when I change again the code after resetting the remaining in the remaining two ways, soft and mixed?
what do you mean? Can you come repeat it?
Actually, in the hard resetting, when we do hard reset, all the changes have made will be removed permanently. But with remaining two soft and mixed, so when I do reset with all with these two, then I want to add some new code to my source code. Then when I do commit, so what will happen to the previous code? I mean previous commit. So will it
Yeah,
be
see,
still
that is
existing or?
correct. See, first let's assume I modify here. Okay. After I modify here, I will put into the staging area. And after that, it will go and create a temporary reference here. So now, if you are saying, if I undo from the repository reference, okay, or I am undoing from the staging area, the content of the file is still available in the working directory. So you haven't done anything. So now you go back and you add as many changes that you want, but all the changes will be still in the working directory as unmodified. Then, depending on your need, if you are ready, then go ahead and do a staging area and this will come back. So that is where, if you remember, I showed you the same option first, so that when you do a undo from the staging area using mixed mode, it will still keep the file in the working directory. So the content of the file will be there. But later on, if you want to do a commit, then you have to follow the same process of adding it to the staging area and then committing it.
Okay, thanks.
Adam, looks like the screen was freezed.
No, I'm not showing anything. It's the same.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Adam,
sometime
one
network.
small doubt.
Yes.
Yeah, one small doubt, Adam. So, is there any version difference in this kind of backup activities or the undo and the reset activities? I mean, in Git old version and new version, anything like that? Any changes?
Which one we are talking about?
All these Git reset and Git stash, like, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure like what is the version of Git we are practicing right now, and what would be the older version and what would be the difference on these things.
No, usually if it is there, it's any different functionality. But other than that, all these things are standard functionality. Probably some new options might have been added to the, or arguments might have been added to the existing one. If not, this will not be causing a problem. So the version is more about new functionalities. So this should be still the same.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Okay. Now I look, I think there is a connection problem. One second.
This conference
move on.
will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
Very good. Anyway, so now what did I tell you? If you want to undo the changes before you are committing, then you are going to use reset. Now let's take a scenario that I committed. Now as soon as I commit, what happens? This will go off, this will go off, and in this we will get a new commit ID. Okay, just an example. We will get a new commit ID here, and the head reference will be pointing to that. Okay, so this is where now let's assume you are a developer or a user, and what you did is you modified some changes and you submitted the commit to your repository, and then you push the changes to the central repository. So now when it goes to the central repository, if someone else tries to do a clone of the workspace, then they will be getting your commit ID also. So now let's assume in such a scenario, one of the user try to take your change and modifying something, and for him it is not working. Okay, so then they will tell you that, okay, see, because of your commit ID, I took your commit ID, on top of that I'm trying to do some changes, it is not working. So that way they want you to undo the changes, because if the commit ID is still there and any changes you are doing, it is actually happening on top of it. So that is when now if they say that, hey, your code modifications, whatever you have done is causing the problem, so please go ahead and undo. Because if you take time, or let's say that you went home in the night, now until you come in the morning, no one will be able to do any change, or they will not be able to test their change. So that is where one of the scenario next what we will have is you might have to undo the changes that you have done inside a commit already. Okay, so what I'm saying is you went ahead and did the commit, and how will you undo it? That is the question that we are going to have. Now for that, first let's try the same scenario. So first what I'll do, so now the head reference is pointing to a commit ID called F3. Okay, so remember this is the commit ID that I'm currently having. So what we will do, we'll try to add the line called dummy line into the 2.java. Okay, so let's assume that I have added, and now I will commit it. And let's assume that I have done a push. Okay, but regardless of that, now if you come and look at the commit IDs, so earlier the head reference was pointing to F3, but now it automatically got moved into some other reference. Okay, so this is where the requirement what we have is I want to undo the commit. So what do you mean by undo the commit? Whatever the changes that we have brought because of a commit, I have to undo. So this is where in Git you cannot typically remove a commit ID, because anything that is stored in a repository will be permanent, and it is not just a content which is saving, it is storing it as a checksum. So that is where you cannot modify it. So now if you have to do manually, what is that you will do manually? Suppose assume that I'm asking you, hey, fix this problem. So what we will do is, once again, I will go back to this file and I will remove this line, and then I will check it in again. So that way, that check-in I will push. So if you understand, this is the manual process. So I have to go back to all the lines of the file and undo it or remove it, and then submit it again as a new commit ID and push. Correct? So that is the only possibility. The same thing is what we can also do using Git by a command, which is what we call it as git revert. Okay, so there is a new option called git revert, and you are going to say a commit ID. So what will revert do? So like how I was telling manually, it is also going to do everything automatically. So what do you mean by that? So for example, if I now say git revert and this commit ID, so what it will do, who created this commit ID? Someone on top of this commit ID. So what it will do, it will undo all the changes and it will keep all the files, the content similar to this particular reference, and on top of that it will go ahead and do a commit, just like how I did. If I have to do manually, then I will edit the file, remove this line, and then commit, so that on top of this EA1, you will get a new commit. The same way, if you say revert, what will revert do? It will go back to the previous commit ID, take the content, apply it now, and now if it applies again, then typically it is a change, right? Because this is the content. If I apply the content of the previous commit, then this line is not there. Then what will happen? It is considered that the file has been modified. So that is where the revert will modify the content back to its original place, and then to track that also, it will go ahead and create a commit. Okay, so that is how when you say a revert, you will get a new commit ID, and if you look at that, it will not be showing you the current one, it will be showing you the previous one. So this is how you will be able to undo the changes at any point of time, and you can also keep a track of it. I will tell you why you should not delete for another reason also, because this way any changes that you do will be on top of the existing change. Okay, so it cannot just remove the commit ID. So when you say now revert and a commit, Git will try to undo the changes, but it will apply it on top of the existing changes so that a new commit ID will come. Okay, so watch this now. If I say git revert and this commit ID, now internally this is going to apply the change and it will try to do a commit. So that is where when we do a commit, we have to give a message, right? So it is opening up a default file. So I will just leave it as it is and I will save the file. Okay, so this is a VI editor, so I'm just going to save it by default. So now first look at the git log. So you can see we had this commit, so we added the dummy line and it created a new commit ID. Now this is what we reverted, so it would have gone and picked up the content of the previous commit, apply on top of it, and to track that it would have created a new commit. So that is where now we are pointing to a new commit and it would have reverted the change. How? If you go back to the content, you will see that dummy line has been removed. So this is how we should not be waiting for a person to go ahead and fix it, because let's assume that for those people who know CI/CD, now it's all about continuously building, continuously testing. So that way there will be many developers who are trying to check in. So if one of the commit ID has a problem, then I should not be just waiting for the person to come and fix. So that is where we will try to set up a policy in an organization saying that if a failure happens and if it is not fixed within some duration, we can go ahead and do a undo. How will you do? You will do it through a revert. So what will revert do? So revert will not delete your commit ID, but on top of that, it will create another commit ID with the older content. Okay, so remember, so this is how, if you want to undo a commit, then you're going to use revert. Okay, but it will not delete the commit, it is going to keep the old commit, and top of that it will create a new commit with the old content. So why it has to do, that is the next question. The reason behind that is, so let's assume you are the developer. Okay, so you are the one who created this commit ID. So you went home and you came back tomorrow, and tomorrow you are going to start your work. That time you will try to do a pull. Now when you do a pull, you will not find your change because it has been reverted. So now when you do a git log, and you will find out that someone has reverted your change. So this is where if you will go and ask them why was it reverted, then either they should have given a proper message in the commit, or they will tell you, okay, we found this problem. Now it could be a genuine problem, or sometime it could be because of a misunderstanding also. So what will happen now, if the user misunderstood that the problem is because of your commit ID, actually it could have been some other commit ID, then what will happen? So in that case, now if your commit ID has been deleted permanently, then you will never be able to get it back. correct? So that is where revert can also be a mistake. So whenever you say a revert, you should always keep the backup of that. That is where Git will not just undo the changes directly or delete the commit. It will create a new commit ID and it will track. Okay, so that is when you can go back at any point of time and see the changes. Okay, so this way, now if you want to go back to a commit, so let's assume that the same problem I said, yeah, some developer assumed that this commit ID caused the problem, but now I want to go back and test it once again so that I can confirm is it a real problem or not. Then I need to go back to my old commit ID. So then also the commit ID should be available. But anyway, now from this, if at any point of time, if you have a scenario where you want to go back to an older commit ID just for seeing, not for modifying, I will tell you what is the difference again. So now, like I say, if you are a developer, in the morning you came back and you found that your commit ID has been reverted. To confirm that, you want to go back and fix it. So this is where either you want to go back and see the content, or you want to test it to confirm whether it is really your problem or it is because of your code. Then how will you go back? So that is where, if you want to go back or traverse to an older commit ID, then you need to move the head reference from wherever it is to a particular commit ID. So if I move the head reference back here, then what will happen? Like the scenario that I told some time back. If the head reference is pointing here, then you will be seeing only that content. So how do you do? So that's where you are going to use git checkout again, and you are going to tell a commit ID. So when you say git checkout and a commit ID, what will happen is the git will try to show you the content of the older commit ID, not the latest commit ID. Okay, so watch this now. So I am currently pointing to the latest commit ID and the content of the dummy line is not there. So if I simply say git checkout, and if I refer to this commit ID, watch it. The head reference is now moved, and because of that, if I say this file 2.java, you can see you will get it back. So this is how you are going to keep a transaction or keep a list of all the commit IDs, so that whenever it is needed, you are going to go back and refer. So now, as a user, I will know and I will get back my changes and I can go ahead and test it. However, if I feel
Adam,
that
can you
this,
revert the like middle of commit?
wait for a minute, I'll finish it. Okay, so now this is where you will first know whether the problem is really with your code or someone has did a mistake in doing a revert. So that is where, suppose if someone by mistake reverted your commit ID, then what you can do is go back to the latest commit ID, and if you remit this commit, what will happen? It will create another commit for this and it will put back your content, right? See, from this, if you did a revert, what happened? It created a new commit and it put back the old content. The same way, from this commit ID, if you say revert, then it will take the old content and create a new commit ID. So that is how you can do a revert of revert and you will get back the changes. Okay, so that is one of the scenario you have to do. But for this, again, you have to go back to the latest commit ID. Okay, and not just this. What if, assume the problem was actually in this commit ID? So now I got a detail. Okay, what was the problem? So I have to fix it. Now where will I fix? So just like your bank transaction, you cannot just assume. What I'm saying is, let's say from yesterday there was, okay, let's assume that there was 10,000 rupees in my account, and in the morning there is some 10,000 rupees I have given to someone. So now if I have to add 10,000 rupees to my account, it will be on top of what I have currently, so that it should be 0 plus 10,000. So the total is 10,000. Is there a way where if I go back to the old transaction like yesterday night, and if I say, okay, add 10,000 to that, then expecting your account to be 10,000 but 10,000, that's not the right way, right? Because it should always take the latest. The same way, in your repository, the transactions are also incremental and it is based on the previous one. So if you're checking out, doesn't mean you should immediately modify here, because the temporary reference or whatever the reference that you have, everything is based on the latest commit ID. So you should go back to the latest commit ID, and from there you should modify and commit. Okay, so remember, you cannot just randomly go. So that is where the git checkout command is only for traversing or moving between commit IDs, so that you can see the changes, so that at any point of time, if you want to start doing your changes, then you should always go back to the latest commit ID, and from there only you're supposed to work. But all these things will be available for transaction purpose or history, so that you can have a look. Okay, clear on this first? Why we do revert, and why do we keep the changes, and how is that you're going to modify if there is a need? So you're going to go back to the latest
Hey Adam.
and start the work. Yeah.
Hi, this is Pramit. I have one question.
Can you just wait for another few
Sure,
minutes
sure.
so
Yeah.
that I will finish the topic, and then we'll have a QA sessions. Okay.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. Just give me 5 minutes. So that way, what did I told now? If you have already committed and if you want to undo, then you are going to do a checkout or revert. And if you want to go back between different commit IDs, then I can choose the checkout and I can keep moving. Okay. Now, in this, what did I do now? If you watch very carefully this, see, the latest commit ID is BD. Now, we did a checkout of an earlier one, correct? So now see what exactly is the git log showing. See, the git log here, it is showing BD, which is latest. But now, watch this. So what is the latest commit ID that is showing? It is showing it as EA. And the head reference is pointing to this. So that way, does it mean this is the latest commit ID? No. The head reference has been moved. But what is the latest commit ID? If you go back, latest commit ID is this BD23 that we had earlier. Okay. Now that is where now if you want to work, you should go back to the latest commit ID. So now how will you go back to the latest commit ID? Now the solution for that is, again, you should say git checkout and the latest commit ID, and it will go back. Correct? Now that is possible. But what if I say like this? Let's assume I did a clear and you don't know the commit ID. Because when you say git log, it will try to show you the commit IDs from the head reference currently where it is pointing to everything below it. It will never show anything above it. So that is where now there are a couple of more things that you need to know, which is following what we just saw. So this is where, let's come back to this command and understand something few more. So I told you that this is checkout command, and in the checkout, if I say commit ID, the head reference will be pointing to that commit ID. Okay, but have we not used the same checkout command in the branching also? So what was the difference? So here we said git checkout branch, and it took us from one branch to another branch. But here we are saying git checkout under commit ID, and it is taking us from one commit ID to another commit ID. But let's get a little deeper. You are working in a repository, and now by default, if you say you are working, yes, you are working in a repo. But inside the repo, where exactly you are working? You are working in a branch, correct? But now let's focus a little deeper. When you say that you are working in a branch, where in the branch you are working? So you are actually pointing to a commit ID, and with that commit ID only you are working. So that is how it is not just a branch, at any point of time, if you are saying that you are working in Git, you have to say in a repository on a particular branch, and in the branch on a particular commit ID you are working. Okay, so it's just like in your office, if you have to get identified, you will get an employee ID plus you will be attached to a team, correct? So that is where if someone has to identify you, they have to say, hey, go to this particular team, and in that team this person will be available, correct? So same way, at any point of time, now when you say checkout, the meaning of checkout is you have to see the content, what content you have to tell. So that is where I cannot just say a branch or a commit, because if I say a branch, in the branch which commit ID, so I have to give both of them, the branch and the commit ID. So I have to give both of them. But how did it work so far? Wherein when we try to do a git checkout a branch, we didn't give the commit, and in this we didn't give the branch. So that is where what happens is, when you try to say git checkout and branch and you didn't tell the commit ID, but have you noted you were always going to the latest commit ID of the branch? So that is where as soon as you went in the branch, you will see the latest commit ID and you will start working without knowing it. So that is where if you tell only the branch, and if you have not told the commit ID, then it will always take the latest commit ID. Okay, so remember, this is how when you did the git checkout branch, it was always going to the latest commit ID of the branch. Same way, when you say git checkout and a commit, which branch did it took? So that is where you will be obviously able to see the commit because you are in one branch. So that way, when you say git checkout and a commit ID, Git will take by default the current branch is your branch. Okay, and that is where now if you understand, when you said git checkout branch, it took you to the latest commit ID of the branch, and when you say git checkout a commit ID, in the same branch from one commit ID to another commit ID, it took it. So that is how it's always a combination of branch and commit ID. Okay, so why am I talking about this? So now let's go back to our problem. Here, if I say git log, I'm not seeing the latest commit ID. So how will I go back to my latest commit ID? I don't have to worry to know the commit ID. If I simply say git checkout and the branch name, it will always take me to the latest, right? So I don't have to worry. So that is where, see, I'm working on iOS branch. So if I simply say git checkout and iOS, it clearly says that the head position has been moved from this to the latest commit ID. So because of that, if you come back, you will be able to see that the latest commit ID, what you are pointing is this BD23. So this is how, when you do a checkout, remember, checkout is not just about seeing the file. You are telling which branch you want to work, and in that branch, which commit ID exactly that you want to pick it up. So this is how, with the combination of both the branch and the commit ID, you will be able to tell the Git what exactly you want to work on. So this is where at any point of time, okay, now quickly if I show you, if I say git checkout master, so it will always take me to the latest commit ID of the master. Okay, so that is how we can switch between the branches, or within the same branch we can switch between the commit IDs. However, the detail is, if you say checkout or a checkout, you need to tell the branch and in that which commit ID. Okay, so that is how now if you want to go back and do some work, you need to understand from which branch you have reverted the change or in which branch you did the checkout. Then go ahead and just simply say git checkout of that commit ID or the branch, then it will take you by default to the latest commit ID of that branch. Okay, so this is how what we learned today is more about, after your regular workflow, if you want to undo a change before the commit, or if you want to take a backup before the commit, then there is a stash command. Or if I want to just undo, but before the commit, if I want to undo from different areas like staging area or from my file, then we will be using what we have something called as reset. And the same way, if you have already committed and if you want to undo, then you have to say git revert a commit ID, wherein this will create a new commit ID on top of the changes what you have done to undo. And you can always traverse from one commit ID to another commit ID. Okay, so for that you are going to use the checkout, which will take both these values, and depending on what you give, the other one will be taking the default one. Okay, so this is how now when you are working, whether you are trying to take the files and modify, or you are trying to see the content, because sometimes let's say you are not a developer, but I am giving you, or you are taking up a responsibility for doing some automation, then you should know this logic. So that is when you will be able to do a undo and start working, because you cannot wait for developer to come back and fix the changes. So if you know this logic, you can write automation for this also. It's possible, but the logic is that you're going to make sure you're going to undo and then start working. Or if you are the person who want to modify, then you can just go back to a particular commit ID, see the content, and then start working accordingly. Okay, so that way, this is more of the user level advanced functions that you will take on the need. Or again, you have to educate others, because this is where if you are following a best practice, it's not just about using it. So you have to educate people like what are the advantage by using it, so that those as a developer who are going to modify in a day in and day out, it will be quite useful for them. Okay, so that's what typically we had for today. Any questions?
Yes, I do have.